All right, let's jump right into this explainer, because we are looking at a massive intellectual earthquake in the study of global politics. For decades, the study of world affairs was dominated by one very specific, very rigid way of looking at the world. But in the late 20th century, everything shifted. Today we're going to explore that exact shift, what we call the post-positivist turn, and see how it completely rewired the study of international relations.
So think about this for a second. Can global politics truly be studied like a natural science? Can we really map the behavior of entire states the same way a physicist maps the trajectory of a falling apple? For a long time, the academic establishment was firmly in the yes camp. But, as we're about to see, a growing wave of scholars started pushing back, arguing that treating human systems like physics kind of misses the entire picture of how our world is actually put together.
Okay, here's a quick look at our roadmap. We're going to start with the positivist status quo, dive into the post-positivist turn itself, break down 3 major approaches within it, look at how they transform the field, and finally ask if this led to a healthy pluralism or just a bunch of isolated camps. So let's set the stage with the positivist status quo. For a huge chunk of the 20th century, IR was absolutely dominated by positivism. Positivists assume that the objective, empiricist observation we use in the natural sciences applies directly to the social sciences. We're talking about theories you probably know well, like structural realism or neoliberalism. They lean heavily on quantitative measurement, statistical analysis, basically predictive modeling. Positivists genuinely believe the international system operates under universal deterministic laws. To them, the social world is just out there, waiting to be objectively measured, and the science behind it has to be completely value-free. But then we hit the post-positivist turn, often referred to as the third debate. The battle lines here are actually drawn quite clearly. On one side, you have positivism, all about objective facts, a value-free approach, and focusing intensely on how power is exercised by states. But post-positivism flips that on its head. It argues that our reality is socially constructed. Plus, it takes a normative approach. Basically, ethics and values totally matter. And instead of just looking at who holds power, they want to know how that power is actually experienced by different groups on the ground.
This paradigm shift goes deep across 3 main dimensions. Take epistemology, for instance. That's how we know what we know. Positivists rely on empiricist observation, right? But post-positivists argue knowledge is interpretive. Then there's ontology, the nature of reality itself. Positivists see an objective, material world, while post-positivists see a reality that's co-created by language, ideas, and power relations. And finally, axiology, which is the role of values. Post-positivists reject the whole idea of value-free inquiry entirely. They argue that values are always embedded in our knowledge. Always.
Now, it's really important to get this. Post-positivism is not just one single unified theory. It's more like a giant umbrella term. The main thing uniting all these scholars is their deep dissatisfaction with the established traditions, especially neorealism. They are highly skeptical of any claim to an absolute universal truth that magically applies to all people at all times. Instead, they want to create a space for competing reflections.
So, let's step under that umbrella and define 3 major approaches driving this movement.
First up is post-structuralism. This approach focuses heavily on language and discourse, and they reject empiricism pretty much entirely. They argue that language doesn't just reflect reality, it actively constructs it. So, those foundational concepts we use all the time in global politics, words like national interest, sovereignty, or anarchy, they aren't neutral facts. They're specific constructions created by powerful states. Think about it. By labeling a military action a humanitarian intervention, powerful actors legitimize what they're doing and literally shape how we perceive reality. Next, we have feminism. This is a gender-sensitive approach that looks at how women are structurally disadvantaged in international relations. Feminist scholars rightfully suspect that mainstream claims about universal truths are, well, actually just based on a masculine perspective. By hyper-focusing on the high politics of states and militaries, traditional theories keep women and their lived experiences completely at the margins. Feminism exposes how the daily, everyday workings of global politics reproduce these gender hierarchies. The third major perspective is post-colonialism. This takes a critical viewpoint to really understand the lived experiences of areas that were formerly colonized by Western powers, places across Africa, Asia, and Latin America. It broadens our view by integrating these vital historical experiences from non-Western cultures. It shows us how traditional IR has basically naturalized a very Eurocentric view of the world, conveniently ignoring the historical violence that went into forming those states in the first place. Okay,
Moving on to how these approaches actually ended up transforming international relations. What do they contribute?
Well, a massive contribution is how they altered the very agenda of global politics. They totally dismantled the idea that researchers can just sit back in some state of objective scientific detachment. They introduced reflexivity, meaning scholars had to examine their own biases and admit, hey, I'm part of the world I'm studying. They fostered a real ethical commitment to marginalized voices, and they finally supplemented the traditional obsession with high politics, war, diplomacy, the whole shebang, with low politics, focusing on non-state actors, ethnicity, gender, and just the everyday world.
Because of this, post-positivism made the entire discipline vastly more pluralistic. And this is key. They didn't just abandon the pursuit of truth, they redefined objectivity. They showed us that understanding the subjective sides of global politics isn't just some fluffy academic exercise. It's absolutely crucial if you want a complete analysis of power and security. They swapped out the hunt for universal, final answers with critical questions meant to emancipate and transform. But that brings us to our final section: pluralism or isolated camps. Is this actually working?
With all this questioning of universal truth, there's a genuine fear among scholars that the discipline is just dissolving into camps that can't even talk to each other anymore. As this quote vividly points out, the field can sometimes look like the mythical Lernaean Hydra. You cut off one conceptual head and two more appear. The sheer amount of theoretical speculation can be dizzying. Some critics seriously worry that this excessive pluralism will lead to hopeless theoretical incoherence, where we don't even have shared standards left to judge what a good theory looks like.
The scholar Yosef Lapid captured this risk perfectly, and with a bit of humor. He warned about the danger of moving from mutually assured boredom, where traditional scholars were just trapped behind these walls of redundant positivist data collection, to mutually assured deconstruction, or MAD, right? A scenario where paradigms get locked in this deadly embrace, spending all their time tearing each other's ideas down without actually building anything new.
However, despite those fears, the evidence actually points toward a much more optimistic reality. Instead of falling into mutually assured deconstruction, IR seems to be maturing. Scholars are actively discovering a cooperative middle ground. They're becoming more self-aware. The discipline is forming what you could call a communicatively constituted community. Basically, as scholar Terence Ball suggests, they're replacing the rigid dogma of the past with a culture of actually talking and, more importantly, listening to one another.
So, ultimately, post-positivism is coming of age. Scholars in these critical schools are spending way less time just criticizing mainstream theories and a lot more time cooperating. The third debate didn't destroy the discipline, it enriched it. It gave us a much better repertoire of questions and brought IR to a state of vital maturation, equipped with diverse, strong paradigms that can actually tackle the messy realities of the modern world. I'm going to leave you with this final thought to chew on. When we look at the incredibly complex, volatile world we live in today, is an objective, absolute truth actually necessary for international security? Or is the ability to understand and navigate diverse, socially constructed perspectives the real key to unlocking global politics? Keep that in mind the next time you're watching the world news. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and as always, keep questioning the status quo.